Hi, Misha and Peanut here, and this is German Bundesweek Part 1. Decided to do this because we've been talking Heckler & Koch lately. Recently put out a review on the HKMR 556A4. Check that out if you haven't. And not all that long ago, put out a video on the Gewehr 1 when we were kind of looking at FALs. And while we've looked at the Gewehr 3 and Gewehr 36 in the past, it's been a little while. So I thought with kind of the 4 main Bundeswehr guns, yep, still here, let's just kind of look at how things progressed from the beginning of the post-World War II German army through really 2025. And I'll explain why these are my semi-automatic examples of each. And I will probably put an extended version over on Patreon earlier than this. But theme weeks are very 90s, and, well, I was a young adult in the 90s, so let's do this thing. We have to begin at the beginning. It says so right on the gun. Well, it would if this were an original. This is, of course, a semi-automatic DSA Type 1 forged receiver, but this is an original Bundeswehr G1 kit. Even has some HK stamped parts. Just to show. And believe it or not, despite how long my videos often are, and despite how much I talk, I don't actually like repeating myself, if I can help it. So for more details on the FAL itself, how the G1 came to be, check out my previous video last year. This time I just want to hit the highlights to kind of set the stage before we move on to the CETME and G3. This is the only one of these I own, and it's a good example of a G1, but what we really start with is what's known as the BGS FAL, which is a pre-G1. Okay, the FAL was kind of positioning itself to be the NATO standard rifle. And 7.62x51 was adopted as essentially the NATO standard cartridge. It was the 30 caliber light rifle cartridge, the T65. It was adopted in 1954, and the FAL was just going into production at that time. Many early users, Canada famously, Israel. Well, West Germany was right there. Now, when the Federal Republic, West Germany, was established in 1949, after essentially completely occupied, and then it was split into West and East, it was completely demilitarized. I can't imagine why. However, it's also on the border with East Germany, and it was thought that if the Soviets ever launched World War III, they would come through the Fulda Gap, and Germany would be the front line of the front lines. Germany needed something, so they did a little bit of a workaround in 1950. The NATO allies did. They basically allowed for a paramilitary force, a federal police force, a border guard force, the Bundesgrenzschutz, to be established in 1951, March. And originally it was very small, just 10,000 men. And originally it would be made up of veteran soldiers from World War II, hopefully that had been cleared of any horrible wrongdoings, denazification and all that. And they were armed with World War II era guns, Karabiner 98Ks, maybe some MP44s, MP40s, what have you. Also Lend-Lease guns from America, well, post Lend-Lease, M1 Grands, M1 Carbines. You get it, a hodgepodge. Already by 1953, the BGS had grown to 20,000 men, and over the next few years, it would more than double in size. So they really needed a new standard gun, especially with the new NATO cartridge. Enter the FAL. Now, this was not the first gun that the BGS looked at. In 1954, they examined the Spanish CETME, the Model 01 and the Model 02. And this is because Dr. Vorgrimler, who had worked on the STG-45M at Mauser-Oberndorf during World War II, which was a further advancement and simplification of the STG-44, he moved to Spain and progressed there. CETME with the roller delayed blow system. But originally it was chambered for 7.9233 Kurs. And then in 1953, Spain made their own cartridge, 7.9241 CETME. It was actually a really good cartridge, but with an 8mm bore, it was non-standard. That would be the 01. The Bundesweek requested that they scale it down to 7.62 30 caliber to be more in line with NATO. But this would still have the 41mm, so 7.62 by 41. Actually, in testings in 1954-55, the CETME Model 02 here did very well. That's a skinny, relatively long projectile, so it was under serious consideration. But at the same time, they acquired a little over 100 FALs from FN Herstel in Belgium, and the first batch sent to the BGS were just basically the so-called Canada model, with just a few improvements. They had the wood furniture and all that, bare muzzle. And then in 1956, they would actually acquire some of the Type A's from Belgium, and this is where the kind of birdcagey flash hider first appears, although it's pinned on T-48 style.
It's to the Cuban.
And while the Model A's or Type A's would have the wood handguards originally, it would actually be the Type AF or Model AF that would first see the sheet steel handguards and the folding light bipod. And they would pick up roughly 2,000 of these. Sorry, my one here is a little stiff. For evaluation. And so they had that, and they had the CETME. And they really liked the simplicity of the CETME and, you know, the kind of German thing. But the FAL had one key advantage. This fires standard 7.62 by 51 NATO. Full power, all that. The CETME, 7.62 by 41, would still be a non-standard. So, further requests from the BGS and others, CETME would take that and develop the Model A, which was chambered for 7.62 by 51, but CETME, not NATO. That's because it could not quite handle the full power cartridge with the roller delay system it was using at the time, not to mention the steel quality they had. Whereas the FAL, on the other hand, with its tilting bolt lock breech, forged receiver, short stroke piston, all that stuff, it could fire pretty much anything. When FN developed the FAL, that was the idea, multi-caliber, different size, customization for their end users. So yeah. And then in 1956, the BGS would order another 4,800, and these would be the first Type Bs. Very similar to this gun, with one big difference. They had tall sights. They also had a screwed on and pinned on Type 48 flash hider with the Type B bayonet lug. And ultimately, we don't know for sure, but ultimately it seems like the BGS would get roughly 30,000 FN FAL tall sight rifles between 1955 and 1957. But that's the BGS. We're talking about the Bundeswehr. This is Bundesweek. How did those apply? The BGS FALs were not marked Gewehr 1 G1. Again, they were kind of the production models. The biggest customization they really had at that time was the handguard and bipod setup, which other nations, Austria, would definitely go with. Otherwise, pretty standard metric FALs. They would officially cancel their investigation of the CETME series in 1956 and stick with the FAL. The Bundeswehr, well, In 1954, the Allies, along with the West German government, realized that a standing army is needed. It's coming up on a decade after the end of World War II. Long story short, 1955, the Bundeswehr was authorized and begins re-equipping. We did a video last year on the P-38 P-1, how they selected that. But things like the MP-44, the Kar-98, those would not be eligible for update. They need a new rifle. And they looked at the CETME too, just like the BGS. And the reason the BGS conversation is kind of relevant for this video, aside from, FAL stuff, is because several members of the BGS would be transferred over to the Bundeswehr early on to kind of give them some experience and officers and such. And of course, it would be a much larger military. 1956, they began evaluating what's going to be their next rifle. And there are really two competitors. The CETME Model A and the FN FAL, at least an updated version. But at this point, the CETME Model A is still not ready for prime time, not to mention full rate production. Whereas FN, they're hitting their stride. They're producing these. So they need rifles as quick as possible to equip their troops. An order for 100,000 is placed that year for the G1. And they started off with the Type B BGS rifle, and they just made a couple of changes. Most noticeably, they went to the QD flash hider setup. They essentially took the lug and moved it forward on the barrel and did this. I actually showed the grenade launcher and blank fire device in the previous video, so check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, 21-inch barrel. These would not have been chrome lined at this time. Originally, they would have been on Type 1 forged receivers. Like the BGS guns, they were 3-position, safe, single-shot, automatic. Type 1 lowers. And I've kind of kitted this one out to be an early delivery, non-updated G1. Of course, the biggest change, the one that had the most lasting effect, the sights. They went to the short sights. Up to this point, up to the West German Bundeswehr request, you had the open-ear front sight and the tall rear. But they wanted them lowered by 3 millimeters. Lots of good reasons for this. Less snagging, less apt to get damaged and hit. It also lets your soldiers get a little bit lower, poke their heads out a little less. Yeah. And that's obviously a great idea because pretty much after that, everyone, with the exception of like Argentina, would do the short sights. By 1958, they had roughly 100,000 FALs in West Germany, plus 20, 30,000 more in BGS. What happened? Why did this not go? The story is well known. This really wasn't what they wanted. It was a stopgap measure. They were already looking to replace it before the deliveries were complete. So when Fabrik National refused them production rights within West Germany, they knew it was coming. It was kind of one of those impossible asks. They knew the answer would be no, and it was a good reason to switch over. But it would be interesting to see if FN had called their bluff and said, sure, you can produce them, if they would have or not. It's the reason always given, but I question if it was a legit reason or if it was more of a good excuse. And if so, I get it. The CETME had German roots, and let's be honest, it was newer technology. And it would be cheaper to buy and maintain for the standing army. The FAL I love. I really love the FAL. But this is World War II and even pre-World War II tech. Forged parts, and lots of them. No real riveting and welding as such on these. Screws and pins everywhere. Finely adjustable gas system. These are excellent rifles, but not always the most cost-effective to produce, especially the early styles from the 50s. Nevertheless, the soldiers themselves, the nascent Bundeswehr liked the G1. It didn't have poor performance reviews, so that wasn't the issue. And in fact, even though the Bundeswehr would not put theirs in frontline service for too long, the Bundesgrundschutz would actually keep theirs in service into the 1980s. So the BGS rifles served much longer. In fact, they inherited some the Gewehr 1 and its slightly older BGS brother. But it was only in service officially until 1961, and then it was already being phased out. You'd think with well over 100,000 in service, well, you'd think it'd be longer. But, of course not. From the get-go, they really wanted this gun, or at least the earlier version of it, what would become known as the Gewehr 3, the G3. And finally, by the late 50s, Spain has matured the CETME to the point it's actually viable. Although, credit where credit's due, they had a lot of help from Heckler & Koch. This is the Heckler & Koch G3A3, or rather, my Shimano Springfield SAR-3, imported from Greece, made by EBO, later Hellenic. And I think this is probably one of the best examples of just a Bundeswehr pattern 60s, 70s issue that was ever imported, especially for the money. But we'll get there. And while there was a little bit of, back and forth with the adoption of the G1, there would be even more with the G3. This is something we're going to see throughout the videos in this series. When West Germany, later Germany, adopts a new rifle, it's got a lot to go through. Okay, going back. Spain set up CETME, where Grimler was employed there. 1949, 1950, they worked on their guns. The Bundesgrundschutz abandoned the whole CETME system, pretty much just sticking with the FAL. But the Bundeswehr, from the beginning, was still interested. And already by 1954, Heckler & Koch, that young company, which was only about 5 years old at the time itself, started working with CETME to really get the design up to snuff. They both had a lot to learn from each other and help. The Germans could introduce better manufacturing techniques to CETME. CETME could help with kind of the intellectual side of things for HK, and that's back and forth. 1956, there's evaluation of the latest Model A by the nascent Bundeswehr, and already by 1958, a new round of trials to replace the G1 are underway. Now this is the G3. The G2, as I'm sure you know, was the Swiss SIG SG510, which was the export version of the STGW57. Now, the Swiss version would be in 7.5. The version trialed out by West Germany would, of course, be the 7.62 NATO variant, but that's okay. The other main competitor was the G4, which was kind of the transitional middle child version of Armorlight's AR-10. But of course those weren't selected. The G3 was the winner. It was almost a foregone conclusion. And in fact, this announcement was made in early 1959. But there was more business and political wrangling going on behind the scenes. So HK had helped CETME. And what they came up with was the Model B, first seen in late 1957, really put into prototype production in 1958. HK took the Model A, which could only fire 7.62 CETME, and helped CETME improve their stamp steel technique. They added fluting to the chamber. They gave it a new recoil system. They improved the bolt group, all so that it could fire 7.62 NATO. Now, to be fair, the early Model Bs were still trimmed for 7.62 CETME a lot of the time, but you could swap the bolt group out and do a few other little tinkering things, and it would fire NATO. Otherwise, the Model B looked a lot like well, are those CETMEs. In fact, Spain adopted the Model B in 1957, 1958. So early on, the G3s, although they were assembled in West Germany by Heckler and Koch, they looked very, very similar to CETMEs of that day and time. And I don't have my Mars CETME out here, but we had it out to the range about a year ago. CETME! No hold open. So yeah, the original G3 was a fixed wood stock, either a wood slimline handguard, or some even had the CETME-inspired metal handguard with the bipod. They had a totally different style of rear sight than we're used to seeing. They had an early style cocking tube, even an early style bayonet lug. There's a whole list of little changes. Sounds easy, right? Just get it in production in Germany. Not so fast. Germany, Heckler & Koch especially, but Germany in general, wanted full production rights and ability to update and maintain and market the gun. Spain, CETME, which was set up by the Spanish government, they wanted to maintain those rights. They wanted to kind of restrict HK's production rights or get some royalties. So yeah, it wasn't just FN. And on top of that, Rheinmetall, another predominant German company, keep in mind HK's pretty young, they wanted a piece of the pie and even claimed some resources. Now, yeah, because the Vorgrimmer was there and the CETME was based on the STG 45M from World War II, you know, neither company's Mauser. People are claiming things. There's a lot of back and forth. This is relevant. Eventually, Spain and Germany as nations work it out. And Rheinmetall, to keep them happy and to provide a lot of these quickly to the Bundeswehr, also receives production orders. So in 1959, production is not only at HK, but Rheinmetall. Cool. So they're able to actually deliver these very quickly to the Bundeswehr. But, as I said, this is an example in semi-Mac form of a G3A3. What about the A1, A2? Let's put a pin in the A1 for just a minute. The A2 had a wood furniture set, but it was the first to have the iconic HK Diopter sights. The 4-position drum. And I believe that was first done to make Norway, or maybe it was Sweden, happy. One of the contracts. Because even though they were supplying these to the Bundeswehr, they were looking for export customers. This would be the competition to the FN FAL. But the early guns, you know, the wood was a little heavy. There's issues there. 1963, 64, they introduced the A3 here is the modernized variant. We did refine the cocking tube, the cocking handle a bit. We went to the modern bayonet lug. But the big deal, the polymer furniture. Polymer stock with metal cap, polymer handguard with heat shield. The lower is a metal housing with the polymer grip. Of course, some later ones would be an all thing. And of course, the German ones would have an SEF marked lower. Whereas the Spanish Model B, known as the M958, could be 7.62 CETME or 7.62 NATO, depending on swapping out bolt components and all that. The G3 was 7.62 NATO, and in Spain, the Model C, which would be adopted as the M964, it would be the dedicated NATO version. That said, when we compare the G1 and G3, we'll get more into it, but even afterwards, if you wanted to change the cartridge these fired, you would sometimes have to swap out like rollers, locking pieces. We talked about the FAL being machined forged steel, no riveting, welding them though. Well, the G3 is the opposite. Stamped steel wherever you could do it, although the trunnion is still machined. Welding wherever you can do it. A little bit of riveting. But also modular. Push pins and everything. This was kind of initially done to make production easier, save money there. But from the very get-go, HK and CETME wanted to make this a weapons family. This was kind of the idea in the late 50s. You see the same thing with Armalite and Colt. Let's just have universal swappable handguards, muzzle devices, and yes, of course, butt stocks and trigger packs. As to the magazines, 20 rounds were the standard. Now, of course, the original mags in the 60s were steel, and they've still used those. But HK would introduce the lightweight alloy mag, and it became very popular. Was it as durable? Maybe not, but looking around today, there are plenty of alloy mags still in perfect shape, and they've made these in just huge numbers. So this would become the de facto standard. And you notice with the G1, I did not show a bayonet. That's because they didn't really have one in the German military. But they did, of course, for the G3. There it is. Most of these, at least used by the Bundesweek, were made by Acorn. There were a few different versions. Pretty standard blade. Nothing crazy there. Bakelite style grips. But the attachment method, it doesn't go here. It actually has the over-the-barrel style you're familiar with, and it's pretty neat. Get it on here. This one fits a little tight on this gun. There we go. Tight's good though, especially with this top mounting. Interesting decision to do this. It works though. Because of the modular design and the desire to kind of customize for international customers, lots of accessories and variations were made. Already by the mid-60s, Heckler & Koch had several external customers and even some places doing licensed production. Now, Greece here, they did not begin until 1977, with production not really happening until 1979, 1980, so they were relatively late. But Norway and Sweden, several others would be earlier adopters. I mean, Portugal, POF made some. And variations would continue well past the A3 here. In fact, there's another major model that the Bundeswehr also purchased. I'm talking, of course, about the G3A4, the retractable stock version. Remember I said we'll put a pin in it? Well, a retractable stock was kind of in the design baked in from the beginning. Originally known as the G3A1, or at least once the system was kind of retroactively set up. It was very similar to this, but just not as strong, as well defined. And what's great is all you have to do, thanks to that design system, is pop off your fixed stock and install your stock. Everything else with the A3 and A4 would be the same going forward. The standard A3 had an overall length of 40.5 inches. And the A4, with its stock extended, was also 40.5 inches. And of course the big benefit here, it's very quick and easy to collapse in. This is also a very durable stock. It's pretty much all metal. It's right over 33 inches. So you are saving about 7.5 inches pushing it in. That really does make this a more compact gun, even though the barrel lengths are the same. But handling this now, it's also rear heavy because this adds a good bit of weight. Set up like this is roughly 10 pounds unloaded. And because this stock is mostly polymer back here, including the butt plate, which is some metal up here, when it's on the gun, it weighs just over 9 pounds. So adding this stock on essentially gives you a whole pound of extra weight. But of course, the big thing here, this style of stock with this curvy butt plate, even if it is rubber coated, it's very hard rubber, and it's pretty owie. Stock for some reason. Never said I was going to put a lot of ammo in it though. And it's just two position, in and out. This is before the days of the idea of adjustable. And that's not because HK was behind the curve. I mean, Colt did the same thing with the Car 15. So there's pros and cons, but for those needing a more compact rifle, a 33-inch 7.62 NATO 308 gun, great for airborne, great for folks in vehicles, maybe guys in an urban environment. And again, if you want to go back to the more comfortable stock, it's just 2 push pins away. It even has a handy dandy place to store them. But yeah, the product line really expands. And it's about the time when the FAL starts to see its sales slowing. So the 70s, the 50s and 60s were the era of the FAL. The 70s and early 80s, that's when the HK takes over. And it seems like a good point in time to kind of compare and contrast the G1 and G3 and see if the Bundeswehr was best served with the decision they made. Because it was a good gun. And like I said at the beginning, the G1s would stay in the BGS into the 80s. And most of the Bundeswehr guns, once they were done with them and kind of done using them as reserve guns in the 60s, when they had enough G3s, would go to Turkey. And that's where we get a lot of our kits from. And a lot of the Bundeswehr G3s weren't surplused out until much later themselves. I mean, this is the gun that put HK's name on the map. And of course, the MP5 would solidify it. And this was the whole family. HK, from the very beginning, wanted to make a design family. That's where the very interesting HK32 comes from, the HK33, and the whole MP5 family. But that's not really what we're talking about here, because the Bundeswehr didn't really adopt those, not in numbers of note. Nope, this video today, it's all about the G1 and switching over to the G3. The FAL versus the HK-G3. In gun community terms, that's an argument old as the hills. And it's actually particularly interesting to look at the G1 and G3 specifically because of the close service. And again, keep in mind, the G1 was not, at least on paper, retired for any kind of performance issues. That wasn't it. But which was better? You know, yeah, pros and cons to each. Now, when it comes to length, because it does have a 21-inch barrel, this has, we'll just say, an 18-inch barrel for easy save. The FAL is a longer gun, 43 inches, give or take, which muzzle device it has, whereas the HK is 40 and a half inches, so a little bit shorter, and that's before you factor in the retractable stock. Yes, FN would introduce para versions in the 60s, but when the G1 was adopted, they didn't have them. Also, you can't switch like you can on the HK. If you have a para FAL, you have a para FAL. So the HK has that ability to be collapsed in. Weight-wise, they're real similar. Fixed stock HK is 9 pounds, collapser 10. The FAL fixed stock is between 9.5 and 10 pounds, depending on the exact variant. Of course, I'm talking unloaded. So they really weigh about the same. That said, I will admit the HK feels lighter with the fixed stock, not the collapser. So I think there's a little bit of a bias there just based on how things balance out. It's also a slimmer gun. It's a simpler gun. But it also doesn't have quite as many features. For example, last round bolt hole opener with release catch, non-reciprocating charging handle. That's what the FAL has. This has no bolt hole open except the manual one. Yes, it has a non-reciprocating handle, but it's way farther forward. And I think most would agree it's a little more awkward to open up because of the roller system versus the FNs. And, the controls, neither one is known for having fantastic triggers. Hard to say. And as far as mag insertions, I think they're equally fine. What do you think, though? As far as ammunition compatibility, that's an interesting point. The G3 is known for being very reliable. That's 100% true, especially when you're running it with 7.62 NATO ammo or whatever it's tailored for. The FNFAL has this very adjustable gas system, meaning that if you get ammo that might be light or heavy loaded or just, from different sources, chances are you can tune the gas to cycle it. The HK, on the other hand, if you need to really change things to recycle ammo, you're going to have to change parts out. Rollers, the locking piece in the bolt group, and also that fluted chamber, while it allows it to do many things, can also mean that it's not 100% compatible with certain types of ammo. Just saying. So, one's maybe more reliable, but one's more flexible when it comes to ammunition. As for durability, both have pros and cons. The nice thing about the FNFAL, a lot of it is forged parts. Okay, these handguards are stamped, but other than that, and so, yeah. And if you need to replace something, an armor can do it pretty much in the field with a screwdriver, a punch, whatever. Most of the things are just very accessible. Heck, you can even rebarrel one of these quite easily with the right size wrench and enough of a brace. Pro tip, even a car, like if you drive it over the end and use that as your brace point, you can do that. So very serviceable in the field and replaceable. G3, stamped and welded receiver. You're not replacing the trunnion or the pinned-in barrel on the field. Not if you want to check headspace and all that. Yeah, it's modular for the stock and handguard and all that, so that can be even more easily replaced than on the FNFAL. But if your receiver gets dented, it can't be fixed, but you need to send it back to the factory where they can straighten it out. So this is repairable at the factory level. This is repairable in the field more. But of course, cost. The HK is cheaper to produce per unit once you pay the initial setup cost. As far as the FNFAL, it depends what tooling you have. This is more traditional 1930s, 40s, early 50s tooling technology. So if a factory already has those mills, lathes, machines, great. The HK, well, you need stamping and the dies, and you need a welding surface. You know, today robots are used, all that. So it just depends. For what I've seen, both can be made very well pretty much anywhere in the world with the proper setup and support from their respective companies, FN and Heckler & Koch. Finally, accuracy. HK wins. The FNFAL is fine as a battle rifle, but it's a 2.5, 3 MOA gun. Part of it is the fact that your front sight and your rear sight are actually mounted on two different things with a screw in the middle attaching them. Part of it is this rear sight's not super stable. It's fine for government work, but yeah. And the tilting bolt system usually isn't known for producing this highly superior accuracy. No, that's not the point. This gun was accurate enough for what it was meant to do. The HK, on the other hand, no gas system as such. The roller system's actually quite accurate, closed bolt and everything. And once they went to the drum, not only did it give a better sight picture compared to the early style, it also gave a longer, more efficient sight radius, including the front HK ring. Even though it has a shorter barrel, it's a more accurate gun. So you're looking at something, 2 to 2.5 MOA, maybe even 1.5. That might be pushing it. You know what I mean? It's, we'll say half MOA better. Again, ammunition type, skill of the shooter, all that matters a heck of a lot. And both companies are known for making high quality barrels, but we have to give credit where credit's due with HK. They use cold hammer forging, and they adopted chroming as a standard. Most of your FALs do not have chrome bores. Only some have chrome chambers. Usually the chrome bores didn't come along until the 60s or even 70s, and I think HK beat them to the punch there a little bit. As far as adoption, technically I think more HKs were made than FNFALs, but more nations adopted the FNFAL. But both were radically successful and very, very well respected, popular, and it's the reason both are the standard. The actual answer is FN, FAL, HK, G3, it doesn't matter. Both beat the living tar out of the Springfield M14. Both are just immensely superior to that. But let me know what you think of my opinion there on the G1 versus G3. I think they're both cool. They're just very different guns, frankly. And I really like these SAR-3s, as I said at the beginning. I think they're a great way, at least they were, to get a military-grade gun. And in some ways, I do even like them better than the HK91s. The finish is more military. And whereas I would be hesitant to modify, even reversibly, a 91 now because of their collectability. With this gun, I wasn't. Like, I put the trigger pack on, I installed the bayonet lug, you know, swap out the furniture, and I'm not afraid to shoot it. I know the HK91s aren't going to break on you, but you know how collectible guns get. Last mag of the day. There we have it. As far as the Bundeswehr service, like I said, Rheinmetall would step out in the late 60s from making them, but HK would continue to deliver them, and they would see some modifications. Most of the ones the Bundeswehr had the phosphate finish and the slim handguard and all that, but it's very likely that later ones might have had the paint finish or the wide handguard. Different bayonets were made in the 70s and 80s. I don't know how many the West German government bought. I've seen a number of 770,000. That's a lot. But then again, this is a relatively affordable gun to purchase on an individual level. Setting up for it might be a little costly, kind of like an AKM. But once you're tooled up, you know, stamped in welding, get all your machines calibrated, yeah. And of course, HK would produce more for other areas of the German government and police, and of course, worldwide, a number of 8 million, including all the, you know, licensed production and probably even a little bit of unlicensed production here and there. And while this would be partially replaced in like special forces and whatnot by a few other guns in the 80s, it would still remain now a unified Germany's frontline standard infantry rifle all the way up until 1997, with many not pulled out of service until the 21st century, meaning that it made it over 4 decades in some cases. Peanut and I appreciate you tuning in for part 1, G1 and G3. Next time, of course, we'll pick up with the G3 and go to the transition over to the G36, and I'll give my hot takes. And again, an extended, more kind of personal anecdote-y version of this will be over on Patreon earlier. If you'd like to participate, go over and sign up, $1 a month, whatever you can do. If not, liking, sharing, subscribing, it's all great as well. Whatever you can do, we appreciate. Even just, you know, prayers and hopes and all that good stuff. With that, this is Misha, and on behalf of Peanut, we'll both catch you very soon with more HK goodness next time.